Well, I walked towards the old town hall with a group of my mates by my side. Well, to join up the Ulster division. Well, they knew I was young, but I lied. But arriving in Europe, well, it hit me the reality of what I would do. I would clamor all the trench ladder when the captain his whistle he blew. Well, tonight as I lie in my dugouts, well, I'm cold and encased in the mud. Well, I long to be with you, my darling. Well, to hold you and to warm up my blood. We would walk hand in hand through old Belfast, through the streets that I love, Sandy Road. But I know that this will never happen, for tomorrow to the battle I'll go. Yes, remember I'll always will love you. Tell my mom, my dad just the same. Well, I'm afraid like the lads here beside me, none in France I will surely remain. Well, I'll fight and I'll die for old Ulster, for the England and the red, white and blue. Don't disturb me, lads, I am writing to my girl back in Belfast, so true. Well, she broke her wee heart when I left her. Well, my Ulster, I'll do this for you. So I bid you good night now, my darling, for it's dark and I can't seem to write. Yes, remember the Ulster division, for the Ulster will always be right. Yes, remember the Ulster division, oh, the Ulster will always be right.
We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. For without victory there is no survival.
Well, hello and welcome to Restore Live. Restore Live going out on a Wednesday evening to Restore UK. That's on Facebook. Also to the British Unionist People's Voice on Facebook. And I would like to ask the people that has joined us so far from across the platforms if they could share this channel, share it out far and wide, tag people into the live chat. If you're new to the channel, if you could leave a message in the live chat, give us a like, give us a love, give us a share. You'll also find us on Twitter and on the YouTube channel. Now, this evening, or should I say this early evening, we're not used to broadcasting at this time, we have Jamie Bryson on with us. Now, Jamie's got a name for, he knows legal stuff, let's just say, and I'm putting this into layman's terms. And he has taken a keen interest in the law and things that go on within the law, and he has fought tirelessly for unionism using the law. And, you know, I met Jimmy in the Supreme Court in London just a few weeks ago, whenever we were there fighting against the constitutional changing protocol. Now, we did do a stream, but the problem with it is that we were down in the annals, let's just say, down in the basement of the Supreme Court, and the sound didn't turn out too well. And we'll have invited Jamie on to really to talk about what it was that we were talking about in the Supreme Court. So again, I would like to ask you to share this out, to give us a like, a love, and a share, and to leave your messages on the live chat. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put those questions into the live chat. So without any further ado, I would like to ask Jimmy to come onto your screen. And to Jimmy, welcome on our screen. I'll just unmute you there before that we start. Now, Jimmy, what I want to really start, let's just get into this. I know that you have about 45 minutes, you've thing to do this evening. So I really want to get into this by really impressing upon you that something that Ben Habib had said to me just a few weeks ago. So what I will do is that I'm going to pop up what it was that Ben said, and then we'll come back and we'll ask you to give your thoughts on what it is that you hear whenever you hear this. Now, before that we go off with this little clip, I really want to say is that, you know, there was a get out of jail free card for the Conservative government, for Boris Johnson, then for Liz Truss, then for Rishi Sunak and co. Whenever they say that they want rid of this constitutional changing protocol, which is breaking up the United Kingdom. Well, my question is, whenever we hear what Ben had to say, is do they really mean what they are saying? We're going to ask you to give us your thoughts on this, Jimmy. I'll put this clip up, and then I would like, off the back of this, for you to give us your opinion.
Not contesting our case. It was put to Boris Johnson. He rejected it. It was put to Liz Truss. She rejected it. And actually, I haven't bothered putting it to Rishi Sunak because I don't think Rishi Sunak has any intention whatsoever.
So again, just a short clip there, Jimmy. And again, that's from the horse's mouth. Now we know what the intentions are of the Conservative government. I mean, have you any commentary on what you just heard there?
Well, in regards to the issue in relation to contesting the case, two answers to that. The first is politically, absolutely. I mean, the political message of the government contesting the case, not only contesting that case, by the way, but I'm sure as we'll come to later, contesting the Puts case, demonstrates politically where they're at. It's a little bit more complex than simply, and this is a legal point rather than a political point, than simply conceding the case and all is good. So I take Ben's right and politically in what he's saying, absolutely, and it exposes neatly the duplicity of the government. From a legal point of view, it's not necessarily as simple as concede the case and everything's okay. The bit, without getting too technical, essentially the argument goes in this that you can't exercise what's called a prerogative power in a way inconsistent with statute, and the argument is, and I support this argument, I think it's right, is that in making the protocol agreement and treaty, you made a treaty which was incompatible with the Act of Union, and therefore that was an impermissible use of the prerogative. Now the question is, did Parliament know they were doing that and retrospectively fix that? Well, they certainly didn't do so expressly. Did they do so impliedly? That's open for determination. But the all-conquering Section 7A, which is the Trojan horse of the entire protocol, if I put it like this, Section 7A is, if you think of it as a pipe, but because just to explain this to your listeners, because important people have this clear in their head, the protocol itself, in terms of the international treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union, has no effect in domestic law unless it's brought into domestic law. So an international treaty is a matter between states. It has no effect in domestic law unless it is given direct effect through domestic legislation. So what Section 7A of the European Union Withdrawal Act does is it acts like a conduit pipe, and the protocol flows down that pipe into domestic law. So if you actually want to fix a protocol, you've got to block the pipe or do away with the pipe so the protocol doesn't flow down into domestic law. So it may well stay there as an international treaty, but you can turn it off in domestic law if you want, and that's what the protocol bill purports to try and do in some respects. So conceding the case politically would have been obviously a very significant moment. In terms of legally and the impact on the protocol, the concession wouldn't really have done anything because the difficulty would be Section 7A would still be there. And that means that Parliament has to fix that. But that's a legal point. Political point, the government on one hand say there's been no constitutional change and this is all nonsense and nothing to see here. And simultaneously, they argue that the Act of Union has been, now Tony McGleenan of the government in the Court of Appeal let slip and said subjugated. He then worked out subjugated might be too emotive a word.
Before you get into the actual wording of that, and again, I want to try to take people on a journey, and I know where you're coming to. But this is something that I had prepared, and whenever I was sitting in the Supreme Court with yourselves, I mean, I'm sitting behind yourself and Jim Allister, and I noted that whenever I heard what I heard, you heard what you heard. I mean, we were gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked at the wording that was being used. Now, could I just, like you say, for the purpose of understanding to the live chat, is that the terminology that was used, that was disapplied, is what they said. Now, I just want to give an analogy of what my understanding of what disapply means, and then you can give the legal, reality to what it is that we just heard. Does it disapply something? I'm going to ask people to think of a car, to think of a handbrake on a car, and you can disapply a handbrake on a car. Now, whenever you disapply a handbrake on a car, what happens is that the car would coast, it would roll, it would end up somewhere where it hadn't been before. Now, to me, what I heard in that Supreme Court is that I seem to have heard those words being used in a way that disapply can also mean it can be reapplied at some stage. And I think that that's what they were actually aiming at, to say, well, we've only disapplied things within the Act of the Union on a temporary basis, and this could be reapplied in the same way that it was disapplied. But the fact is that we are rolling, we are coasting. The economy in Northern Ireland is being, I'm going to say, reorientated towards the Irish Republic. And we are most certainly, just like that car, disapplying that handbrake, we're going to end up in a different place from where we started from. Now, my thoughts are this, is that if we do end up in another place and we reapply what it is they say that they have disapplied and re-engage the Act of the Union to its full form or glory, can it ever be in its full form of glory? My argument is that it can't. So I believe that disapply something under what they said they had done, well, to me, it's stupidness in all fairness. So would you just like to give your rationale for what you heard and also give your interpretation of what disapply means?
Well, disapply means the same as repeal and do away with and subjugate. It essentially means, and it takes its flavour from the European Communities Act, which essentially said that all European law prevailed over UK law if there was an inconsistency. And well, that was clarified a little bit in Thilburn, but we'll not get into that too deeply. But essentially, it means that the protocol via Section 7A is the supreme law of the United Kingdom, and all other law in the United Kingdom, including the fundamental constitutional basis of the United Kingdom itself, the Acts of Union, has been disapplied, set aside, is no longer in effect insofar as it's inconsistent with the protocol. So it's absolutely fundamental. But if I ask people to think of it like this, so the Acts of Union, David Trimble didn't say many right things in 1998, but one thing he said which was right is the Acts of Union, well, to explain to people, the Acts of Union are two parallel acts of the old Irish Parliament and the old GB Parliament. So together they're called the Acts of Union. So I mean, Act of Union, Acts of Union. But David Trimble said the Act of Union is the Union. Now, Article 3 of the Act of Union created the United Kingdom Parliament, and Article 6 created the Economic Union, the UK internal market. Now, if I said to somebody, look, and people need to remember this, there's a difference between something, you may be able to do something legally via the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. So if Parliament decided to pass a law which says all people with black hair shall be denied access to the NHS, plainly Parliament could do that because Parliament is sovereign and Parliament can do whatever it wants. The old saying was Parliament could do anything except make a man a woman, and they even try and do that these days. So parliamentary sovereignty, you could do something like that legally, but that doesn't necessarily mean it would be constitutional. These are two different concepts, and I think sometimes people miss that nuance. So if I said to people, look, would it be constitutional for Parliament to abolish itself if Parliament decided, look, we no longer want to be a Parliament, we're going to be an authoritarian government, people won't have a democratic vote, we're going to abolish democracy, and Parliament is sovereign, we're going to do that. I would hazard a guess that everybody would say that would be a fundamental assault on the very constitutional foundations of the state and would be impermissible constitutionally. So that starts from that premise. If that is so, and Article 3 of the Acts of Union is so fundamental that it's constitutionally beyond the reach of even Parliament to interfere with it, why is Article 6 of the same Act of the Act of Union provided some lesser status so they can mess about, they can disapply Article 6? So that gives you a taste of how fundamental a change this is. And in 1998, David Trimble has been clear, the basis, and I'm anti-agreement, but those who supported the agreement, the basis upon which they did so was that the principle of consent protected against any change to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. Lord Trimble has said that repeatedly. He said that in his Court of Appeal affidavit. Now, if it transpires that actually the principle of consent, which unionism believed it had achieved in 1998, in fact, doesn't protect the constitutional status at all, but instead all it does is act as a handbrake in relation to the final formal handover of sovereignty. If you can change everything about the union except the last thing, then the protection is no protection at all, because by the time you get to the point of asking the question, the union has already been dismantled. So if you can subjugate, disapply, impliedly repeal, set aside, make subject to, if you can stop the Act of Union having effect, then how is that not a constitutional change? And by the same token, people may have seen it, an extraordinary situation in the Putz case. The SPS checks come through Annex 2 of the protocol, down Section 7A, and through something called Regulation 2017625. And that says the checks need to take place at the entry point into the European Union. That's the wording of it. And it defines the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And the government's argument is that in those regulations, in that law, when you see the word United Kingdom, you should read that as applying to Great Britain. And when you see the entering into the European Union, Northern Ireland should be viewed as part of the territory of the European Union. Now, how is that not constitutional change?
I was mimicking your words there. Yeah. How is that not constitutional change? Well, I mean, a child could actually see that, Jamie. Jamie, I tell you what I want to do is I want to go to three things that happened from within the Supreme Court when we were there. And there were 3 points that I made with reference what the solicitors defending against the case that we were taking, what it was that they were saying. Now, I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to try to do this. It could be a wee bit cumbersome, but I want to go through these points and get your opinion on these points. If you just bear with me for a second. So here we go. Yep, we do that. I talk as I go. You've got to excuse me. So I just have to check and make sure that we're all okay. Yes, so we have it here. I'm going to read from it here. You'll see that purple document here that we have where it says consent. That's the dictionary definition for consent. Permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. No change may be made without the consent of the partners is what it says here. So I made a little note whilst in the Supreme Court, and I wrote that the Supreme Court government's defence continues that, and you might see me highlighting this here, cross-community consent removed from the 2024 NI Assembly vote in favour of majoritarianism. And I wrote that the rationale that they gave was the cross-community voting would frustrate a vote championing the constitutional changing protocol. I mean, that's basically what it was that they were arguing at the time. So I'm just going to actually stop this screen, and I'm going to ask for your opinion on that. So just for the purpose of the live chat in layman's terms, what has happened is that the Northern Ireland Assembly, the premise of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, it was built upon this thing called the principle of consent. I mean, I was around in the days of 1994, leading up to the 1998 signing of the Belfast Agreement. However, I did walk away from it in late 1995. And the documents, the government documents that were floating around at that time, were telling us that the union would be safe, that there would be this thing called the principle of consent, which would guarantee Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. And we were aware that there was going to be, there could be a referendum if the greater number of people from within the Belfast Agreement agreed that they wanted to be part of this so-called United Ireland, which it was then. Well, that would be the case, and it was generally accepted. However, it wasn't accepted by me, I have to say. However, that's what was being sold at that time by the great and the good and everybody that was selling that Belfast Agreement. Now, we find ourselves in 2020, the start of 2020. It was when the protocol came into place. It's been in place 2 years. We're coming to 2023, so there's a start of 2021 where this protocol came into place, late January, late December, early January. By the way, people, we've had this for 2 years and it hasn't moved. So we found ourselves in a position whereby when we needed that principle of consent to work for us, we find that it's not worth the paper that it's written on. Now, further to that, what the Northern Ireland office has admitted is that they have altered the text of the Belfast Agreement to provide for the circumstances in where that there could be a majority rule vote in 2024, and I think it's going to be somewhere between November and December of next year, in where that if the conglomerate of minorities from within the Assembly, being the Sinn Féiners, the Alliance Party, the SDLP, possibly even the Ulster Unionist Party, they might vote that protocol into being, and there's nothing that Unionists can do about it. So when it suits them, there's majoritarianism. Now, there was a thing called the triple lock from within the Belfast Agreement, which meant that there was a petition of concern, there was the cross-community support that was required within the Assembly, and there was also the ultimate, which was the principle of consent, which was contained within the Belfast Agreement, which secured the union. Now, all three of those, in my honest opinion, have been completely overridden, and it has been found that it doesn't actually work for Northern Ireland unions. So I entitled that consent, and I said that their rationale was that they removed that consent from within the Assembly to provide for a majority vote because that they would get the wrong answer and it might frustrate their efforts to keep the protocol in place. Jimmy, have you anything to add to that?
Well, you sum it up succinctly very well. The purpose of disapplying cross-community consent is to maintain the union subjugating protocol, and it sends a very clear message to unionism, because whenever unionism was in the majority and had the democratic right to govern, unionism had to give up the democratic right to govern, and we were told that cross-community consent and consent from the minorities was an absolute fundamental of peace and of stability. But the very first time that nationalism partnered up with the useful idiots in alliance came to the conclusion that they could have a majority, that they could put the foot on the neck of the unionist people, all of a sudden cross-community consent was no longer a fundamental. There's two consents. So the principle of consent relates to what I would call constitutional change. So that means, and that's found in Section 1 of the 1998 Act, and I'll say a wee bit more about that in just a moment. So that's that aspect of consent, consent to change Northern Ireland's constitutional status. But then there's a separate context of consent, which I cross-community consent. The principle of consent is not a cross-community procedure. Cross-community consent applies to what I call governance consent, which means that Strand 1.5d of the agreement and Section 42 of the 98 Act, any decisions coming before the Assembly which are controversial or key decisions or which there's a petition of concern is subject to a to a cross-community vote. So it's important to look at the two different aspects of consent here. But as I touched on earlier in relation to the principle of consent, it's not what unionism thought it was. And actually, even if we take it at its height, that unionism somehow gained the principle of consent in 1998, which is just fundamentally untrue, because in the Ireland Act 1949, Section 1, principle of consent was there, subsection 1 was there, identical. The Northern Ireland Constitutional Act in 1973, identical to subsection 1. In fact, in the 1998 Act, we have a subsection 2, which creates a departure lounge and creates an obligation, if certain conditions are met, to call a border poll. That condition wasn't there in the Northern Ireland Constitution Act 1973. So when pro-agreement unionism said we've gained the principle of consent in Section 1, no, they didn't. They actually weakened what was already there in the Northern Ireland Constitution Act. And we've actually seen now, not only did they do that, but the principle of consent doesn't actually at all guard against constitutional change. You can subjugate the acts of union. You can change everything about the union, but so as long as nominally, technically, still a part of the union, there you go.
It is the law of our land. There shall be no change in the Constitution of Northern Ireland unless the people of Northern Ireland so wish. It is there. It's in the 1973 Constitutional Act.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, how plainer can it possibly be? Unionism gained nothing in 1998 in regards to principle of consent. They were fundamentally deceived. And here is the fundamental point. If you can hand lawmaking powers to the European Union, if you can hand judicial powers to the European Union without offending the principle of consent, the logic is you could hand those powers to Dublin, you could hand those powers to the Supreme Court in Dublin, and wouldn't affect the principle of consent. Is there anybody that seriously believes that that's what unionism thought they were signing up to? And here's the problem for devolutionist unionists. Even if the protocol is sorted tomorrow, even if it's fixed tomorrow, how does pro-agreement unionism unsee what they've now seen? So if the basis for pro-agreement unionism is the principle of consent, and even if the protocol is fixed, they've still seen and can't unsee that the principle of consent is in fact a fundamental deception. So if you accept the fundamental basis for your support is a fundamental deception, how do you, with any intellectual credibility, argue for going back into those institutions? And you can't with any credibility. And the only people who would try it is the Ulster Unionists, who, to be frank,
I just want to stop you there, because we want to solidify that exact message that you just presented there. And, and I'm aiming at our political leaders, and our political leaders, they really, really need to take a reality check. And just on the basis of what you just said there, that's how I feel. That's how the people that I know feel. And I hope that that's the way that they feel. I believe that, and again, we'll get to this down the line, and you and I talked about this in the Supreme Court, is that we can't, you said it, David Trimble says, you can't unsee what you've already seen. You can't now go back and think, well, maybe this is going to work for us, Mark 2, because we've learned Mark 1 that it actually doesn't whenever it suits different agendas that's actually following through. So the question is this, Jamie, now that we've solidified that message, and again, I'm saying to the live chat here, is that, again, the purpose of we doing this, and we talked about it between myself, yourself, and Clifford, who was taking the other case in the protocol, is that we really, really need within unionism to define a message going forward and to ensure that every single person within Northern Ireland Unionism is singing from exactly the same hymn sheet and who fully understands the implications of getting this wrong. Because getting this wrong is what we can't do. We don't have time. We don't have the ability to get this wrong anymore, because we have nothing left to compromise on. And from here on in, we're behind. Think of it like a football match. You're watching the World Cup there. We've seen the other day that Argentina was winning 2-0 and the other team come back. Well, we need to come back. We are constantly, we are getting beat right now, and we need
just
to bring
on that point
back.
Just to take that analogy, John, because that's a good analogy. And you see, here's the problem for unionism. We do need to come back because take the football analogy. But here's the problem. Whenever you try and apply that analogy to the Belfast Agreement creates the rules of the game, and the rules of the game are this: unionism defends and defends and defends until the other team score and the game's over. Unionism doesn't have a goal to shoot into. So the structure of the Belfast Agreement provides no mechanism to strengthen the union or to settle the question forever. So unionism has nothing to gain. So the problem is this, as you say, we've give and give and give, so we're behind in the game and we need to come back. But to those of the game, there's no net for us to shoot into because our allotted position is to simply defend the status quo. So the message is this, and it has to be this: if unionism generally wants to change, you cannot do it within the structures of the Belfast Agreement as they currently sit. And that doesn't matter if the protocol's fixed tomorrow. That doesn't still change that. So if you fix a protocol, and it's a long way off getting exactly what we need, but let's take it out of sight. Let's say the protocol goes in its entirety. There's still no basis to operate the Belfast Agreement because it's a fundamental deception. It's a structure which is designed to incrementally ease Northern Ireland out of the Union. And Sir John Laws, former Court of Appeal judge in England, made a great point. He put this very succinctly. And he said in relation to the Scotland referendum, why should any one part of the United Kingdom have the ability to dissolve the whole United Kingdom? So actually where unionism need to go here is to say the principle of self-determination should apply to the whole union. So if the union is going to dissolve because any part wants to leave, that should be a question for the entire union. Or at the very, very least, if you look at the Belfast Agreement, it requires consent, parallel consent from the Irish state to accept Northern Ireland. It requires consent from the people of Northern Ireland. Why is there not a provision to require consent from the United Kingdom for that part of the country to leave? So these are the type of concepts that unionism need to start thinking, because if unionism think that there's ever going to be a future for the union within the structures of the Belfast Agreement as they currently are, it's just a fool's paradise. And if people people like the Ulster Unionist Party, who are constitutionally illiterate, Doug Beattie is legally and constitutionally illiterate. He has no, this is a man who went on to BBC Radio Ulster and said the Act of Union isn't a red line. What unionist thinks that, question for the Ulster Unionist Party, was David Trimble right in 1998 when he said the Act of Union is the union? Or was Doug Beattie right when he said the Act of Union is not a red line? Or, number three, for the Ulster Unionist Party, is the union no longer a red line? So do they disavow Beattie's comments, or do they disavow Lord Trimble's comments? And these are this is the intellectual somersaults that they've got themselves into with their to be frank, idiocy and lack of understanding of the fundamental issues.
So Doug Beattie's always touting for the Ulster Unionist part in the Belfast Agreement and the signing up to it, and he's very proud of it.
Something to be proud of,
Well, I'm looking behind here, right? Okay, this is Mr. Trimble here. He says the union is safe. This was in 1998. He says Northern Ireland's place within the UK has been secured. The Act of the Union, the fundamental piece of legislation defining NI's place within the UK, remains firmly in place. The Act of the Union is the Union. That's what David Trimble said. And here we find that the Act of the Union has been disapplied, or the Act of the Union has been disapplied. And on Doug Beattie, well, I have other words for Doug, but however, we'll not go there. What was it he says? He says that he was a constitutional unionist. He wasn't an economic unionist. That's what he said. That's how he fobbed all of this off. Jimmy, concentrate on what this man here says here. So what can be done? What exactly can people do? Over to you, Jimmy.
Well, number of things. The conflict and the political conflict now is being fought in a new arena. And actually, fundamentally, to advance this, what society fundamentally is run by and is controlled by is its civic institutions. And so, if you control the media, if you control academia, and you control the legal profession, it doesn't really matter how many elections you win, because elections come out in 5-year cycles. you are the one that controls society. And where unionism and loyalism has missed a trick is we have surrendered control of all of those key institutions, media, academia, law, to the nationalist community, who have taken over those institutions, those professions, and they have used that status to advance their political objectives. So the key thing is, and education has to become cool, has to become a weapon for within unionism and loyalism. And look, I'm the first to say, constantly get in trouble for saying it, loyalism had a right to defend themselves during the conflict and to pick up weapons to defend their community. They had a right to do that when they were under attack and our communities were under attack. So by the same token, but now, unionism is under attack because of the academia is leading an assault on unionism, constantly credentialing and promoting nationalism. The legal profession is so imbalanced, legal litigation all of the time to try and damage the union and advance nationalist cause. The media is fundamentally imbalanced against the unionist community. And the weapons of war now are to educate in law, get into the media, get into academia, and get involved in the fight. So this generation of unionists and loyalists have to show the same desire, the same commitment as the previous generation of unionists and loyalists, but have to appreciate it's a different fight. And running about now with petrol bombs and guns and it is the equivalent of running about in the Cold War with a bayonet. It's a new war. It's a new battlefield, and unionism and loyalism don't appear to have properly become equipped for that. So that's what we have to do. We have to be equipped to use the law, to use the media in terms of not being afraid to get in there, engage and challenge the media constantly to change what has essentially now become a nationalist state for nationalist people. And that is the outworkings of the Belfast Agreement. So number one, we've got to do that. We've got to then start developing concepts about how we strengthen the union in terms of getting on the offensive and unashamedly seek to strengthen the union, such as why not say, do you know what? We want to change the concept of self-determination. We want that to apply to the whole United Kingdom, and let's start building academic support for that. Let's start building legal cases for that, and let's challenge them in every way possible. So there's much we can do, and there's much we haven't done. We're many years behind. It's going to be a long path, but the message I want to send very, very clearly is that there is a political war to fight here. The political war is still on, but it's in a different arena. It's in the courts. It's in the academia. It's in the media. It's not on the streets anymore. It's not with guns and bombs. It's with law books. And until unionism and loyalism understands that and gets involved in that, then the battle's going on and we're not even on the field. And that's the fundamental psychological change, and that comes about trying to educate our young people, especially teenagers right the way through, and get young activists in unionism and loyalism to go and be journalists, get into the media, and when you get in there, advance our cause, be as partisan, as biased as the nationalists are, get into the legal profession and start taking cases to advance the union, get into academia and start being a unionist Colin Harvey, play them at their own game. But until we do that, then nationalism essentially gets it all their own way, and that has to be brought to an end.
And again, Jamie, as I said at the very, very start, that you've done very, very well in terms of what it is that you do with reference to the lawful aspects of things. And you will note, as I say, my good school friend who I met in first year in school, in Kernmartin School, well, he got his law degree actually last week, and he's known as a loyalist, but a loyalist that literally has put the past behind him and who is doing things legally. And he was the man alongside Jim Allister, Kate Hoey, Ben Habib in the other legal case to which that we at Restore UK were advisors in. And that's why we all ended up in the Supreme Court. So there was at least something that we have done that is right. And that should be actually pushed forward. Now, I'm going to actually say off the back of what you were just talking about there, is that I'm going to try to, look, I think of titles whenever I hear people talking, and I think of a title called Operation Let's Consolidate the Message. And the message that you just gave there was that we, and these are my own words, is that we need to, an army of people needs to be put together with weapons of words, which will remain and abide for another 100 years. And again, that's the sorts of things that we need to teach people from within society. And I do note that there are a lot of people, and normally coming from the younger generations, who are actually, yourself, Muir Holmes, and others right around this country, too many to mention. We do note that they are pushing for education from within the youth. And why we're behind the curve is this. We do look at what Republicanism have been doing over the years. And whenever, Protestant Unionists and Loyalist children were going to the Boys Brigade and the Girls Brigade and the Wrens and wherever else it was they were going, well, the kids within the Republican side of the fence, they were joining the Republican youth, and we have much evidence of this. So, Jimmy, I know that you haven't got long to go, and this is kind of on your threshold, 45 minutes. Can you stay for another 15? I think that this is a very worthwhile stream.
Probably 5 to 10, just to have enough.
Okay, just a few more wee things that we wanted to really do, and then I can sort of take on with the screen. Because again, what we're going to do, Jim, is we're going to cut this down and we're going to throw out some sound bites, and we're going to try to use this to push forward, because we can't rest on our laurels. We'll have to keep pushing forward. Now, what I want to do again is I want to show the screen. I want to just present the screen in front of me, and I'm going to actually skip over one of the things that I did see in the Supreme Court. So again, just sharing the screen here. Now, again, we've actually crossed this one. Is that, again, I'm just going to read. I wrote, words don't come easy. Supreme Court government's defense continues. Article 6 of the Union has been repealed, but words incompatible with Protocol Withdrawal Act have been altered. For slow learners, Article 6 has been repealed, and I think you said that at the very, very start. So I want to actually concentrate on this one here, Jimmy. Breach of contract. And again, this was something that I tweeted on December the 1st, whenever I heard the government's argument. So it says Section 1, Northern Ireland Act 98 has not been breached, is what they were saying. The argument, repeal implied or otherwise Article 6 Act of the Union causes constitutional change. By extension, I'm saying, and I'm sure anyone with a brain would be saying, that if the Act of the Union has been, and I'll just bring this down here, if the Act of the Union has been disapplied, then what that means is that there's huge implications for Article 1 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. Would you just like to explain in your terms why that the two are interlinked and why that one relies on the other?
Well, the question comes down to, whenever Section 1 of the 1998 Act talks about constitutional change, what does that actually mean? So does that simply mean, is that simply a question of who exercises sovereignty? So long as the UK Parliament was technically sovereign, could you devolve all lawmaking powers to the Oireachtas in Dublin? Could you devolve policing to Dublin? But so long as the United Kingdom Parliament was still technically there. I mean, so for example, if you went into somebody's house, you knocked the interior walls down, you completely changed it, you painted the exterior off it green, white, and gold, but you said, look, not to worry, you still have the tenancy. I mean, it wouldn't be the same house. It would have fundamentally changed beyond all recognition. So on the government's interpretation, you can dismantle the union bit by bit, incrementally, but so long as technically the UK Parliament retains sovereignty, then that's fine, and that's all Section 1 directs itself to. So if that's right, and it may well be in terms of a textual legal analysis that unionism was had in 1998 and deceived. My view was pretty clear, but in any event, were deceived in 1998. Then the question is this: the principle of consent is not worth the paper it's written on. It means absolutely nothing, because by the time, if you can change everything but the last thing, by the time you get to the last thing, everything has already changed. So what worth is the last thing? So on the government's case, changing the union itself, subjugating Northern Ireland's place in the UK Economic Union, does not engage the principle of consent. So that tells you how weak the principle of consent is. So if they're right about that, and that is then the answer to that is, well, that's how deceptive the principle of consent is, and it's worth nothing, and therefore the whole basis of the Belfast Agreement is gone. If we're right that actually Section 1 should apply to any constitutional change, and I don't think anybody could credit apart from Amanda Ferguson, I don't know if anybody heard her on Nolan the other morning trying to give a lecture on constitutional law, and dear goodness, but who thinks that changing the fundamental constitutional basis of the Union isn't constitutional change? I mean, I'm sure Sinn Féin whispered that argument in the ear, but I don't even think Sinn Féin would make such a ridiculous argument. But if we're correct that the principle of consent should prevent such constitutional change as subjugating the active union, then the principle of consent has been breached by the protocol. And what is the solution of that? So whichever way you cut this, the protocol either fundamentally exposes that the principle of consent is a deception and a deceit, or the principle of consent has been breached. It's only one of those two things. It can't be both. And again, on one hand, Tony for the government says, and look, Tony's only making the government's case, but he says, I mean, nothing to see here, no constitutional change. And then in the next breath, but Northern Ireland is now subject to EU law, the EU courts, the active union, which is the union, has been disapplied. But not to worry, there's been no constitutional change. I mean, it's the dishonesty. Or at least if the government were honest, intellectually honest, and said, do you know what, we have altered Northern Ireland's place in the union. I can live with honesty, but it's the intellectual somersaults, the deceit and the lies to try and fool people.
Right. Just two more questions for you, but I mean, I just asked you a question. Are you old enough to remember Monty Python's Dead Parrot? Did you ever see that sketch?
No.
Well, you'll have to see it. The shop, a man bought a parrot from an animal shop, a pet shop. He took it away. He brought it back. He says, "This parrot's dead." He says, "No, it's not. It's sleeping." And that's what I likened on to what is it? He says, this protocol, this act of the union has been changed. No, it's not. It's disapplied.
But it's the same thing. So for the present purposes, the act of union doesn't apply, and we might reapply it sometime in the future. But what's the difference between that and completely repealing it now? Because Parliament could always bring it back in the future. I mean,
so at best, we've been temporarily deprived from our rights, because remember, the Act of the Union is the basis of our rights as United Kingdom citizens. Now, that's something you and I'll come back and talk about, Jamie, because that's a big subject. That is a huge subject. This is now about rights. This is now about human rights. This is now about, and I'm going to take you back to 1969. This is about civil rights. This is what this is about. This is a full circle. This is a complete change in the circumstances. And unionism isn't going to be found wanting, providing that we do the right thing and we do consolidate that consistent message. And I would like to take that up again with you and others. Again, we'll maybe invite Ben Habib and Jim Allister, who's a legal mind, on this stream to talk about how much this affects United Kingdom rights around the United Kingdom. 100%. Now, one more wee thing, and we do have to cross this bridge, and then I'll let you go. And again, I just wanted to cram everything in. Okay, so the protocol bill, it's I don't know, it's stopped, it's seized, it's frozen, it's done whatever. Again, whenever we looked at the protocol bill, and I'm not going to play the little thing, a little clip there from Ben Habib, whenever myself and Ben had done a wee stream about it, I had read it. I'm not a legal mind. However, I'm a logical mind. And in my logic, what I seen was 1 to 20, which were okay, stuff that might apply to us. Then I read number 26, Article 26, where it says, in order for all of those to go back through the Parliament again, we have to trust a Westminster minister to take this through the Houses of Parliament, to kick this about, to send it to the Lords, to bring it back 20 times. I call it a snakes and ladders bill. Have you anything to say about how that it is that Northern Ireland Protocol bill would have transpired if it had have actually seen the light of day? I mean, I was never happy from that from day one. Ben Habib exactly said the same thing. Your thoughts on that, Jimmy?
Well, my view on the protocol bill is this: the protocol bill created. So let's take this in reverse. So we'll deal with that point at the end. So on the substance of the bill first, in terms of that the protocol bill created a framework and a structure for new regulations which would replace the protocol. Now, if those and that comes in clause 22. Now, if clause 22 was amended to say that whichever regulations are made had to be compatible with the Act of Union, then the structure of the protocol bill, in my view, would be acceptable, because whatever you take out, so the protocol bill would strip out certain particular parts, and the problem with the protocol bill is there's no requirement for what's put back in to be consistent with the Act of Union. So if you wanted to make the protocol bill constitutionally compatible, what you would say is, in Regulation 22, you would say that all regulations, and essentially that means what replaces the protocol, has to be compatible with the Act of Union. And if it has to be compatible with the Act of Union, it therefore can't be anything other than constitutional going forward. But of course, that slight niche isn't in there. So the protocol bill has the potential to create a structure in which solutions could be found, but it is not in of itself a solution, let alone a tolerable solution. Now, your point in terms of clause 26, clause 26, in terms of an enactment clause, that's not that unusual. Most legislation has, because if it all just come in on the night that it was passed, I mean, there would be chaos because we wouldn't be prepared for it. So everything has to be brought into force at a particular time. But you're right; it's open to abuse, and it could be strung out forever. So actually, the way to fix that is, I don't think it would be reasonable to say that at the moment the protocol bill 12 midnight becomes law, all of the clauses come in, because that would create chaos. So the way to do it would be to say, stripping the protocol out comes in, and within X amount of months, 2-3 months, a Minister of the Crown must activate the rest of it, or else it automatically, after a short period of time, comes into effect. So that's something to watch. But it'll be interesting to see.
Did it go far enough, Jimmy? Do you think it went far enough, the protocol bill?
Well, no, because the protocol bill isn't in of itself a solution. A protocol bill was only the structure within which a solution could sit. So in terms of building an architecture, it went far enough. But in terms of putting the foundations of the house down, cleaning the land, in terms of removing the protocol, yes, it did go far enough. But in terms of building the new structure, it didn't direct itself to that at all. So we don't know what the new structure is. So the protocol bill has a lot of positive potential. It also has some potential pitfalls as well, and it's all very technical, it's all very legal. But the key thing is, once the protocol bill, if it ever gets there, comes into force and creates the architecture, it's what's then put in. It builds the box, but it's what's put into the box is the actual question, because you could fix the present breach of the Act of Union via the protocol bill, and then put in a new arrangement which breach the Act of Union again. So unless, but as I say, if you amended clause 22, done two things to the protocol bill would fundamentally change it. If you just simply added one subsection into clause 22 and said, whichever regulations are made must be compatible with the Acts of Union, then that means any arrangements have to be constitutionally compatible. And if you put in the fuse that I was talking about in clause 26, in terms of it has to come into force within 2 months, 3 months, then the protocol bill would be a solution, because if you define what's going to replace it as having to be compatible with the Acts of Union, and I don't really care what it is, if it's compatible with the Act of Union, it's constitutionally fine, knock yourselves out. So if unionism is going to campaign for change on the protocol bill, that's where I would focus, clause 22 and clause 26.
So one more question, and I know that you have to go, and I'll continue on. So well, and thank you very much, by the way, for coming on. Thank you for doing this here. You know, again, I come back from the Supreme Court and went off on holiday for a week. I needed a break at the end of the year, and I'm back and I'm ready to go and raring to go again. And I have to say, we've done a lot of contemplating, and you know, I'm going to reach out to more and more people that I have never, ever reached out to. I mean, I did take a stand, and I have to admit this, put my hand on my heart and say that I call me old school. I see things as that, if there can't be a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, well, then there definitely can't be a border at Larne, Belfast, and in Warrenpoint, and that is the bottom line for me. I mean, I seen the protocol bill as lifting, and let's call me, as sentimental, whatever. I seen it as the lifting of the border that is in Ireland at the minute and being placed permanently in Larne, Belfast, and Warrenpoint, and anything that we've ever given as unionists in all of my lifetime. I'm 54 years of age now, and since my time of understanding to now, we have never, ever, ever got that ground back. And for that reason, we should not ever give another inch. Jimmy, thanks very much for coming along. If you would like to just say your closing remarks, I'll move on. And I really do appreciate it. We got you to 6 o'clock. Hope you don't share that with me for keeping you for another 15 minutes. But I think it's been very, very good stream, and I think we've got a lot out of it. And I think the people on the live chat and right across the platforms, there's a lot of people watching right now. So if you would like to just give your closing remarks on whatever way you want to do.
Look, thanks very much for the invite, and obviously happy to engage in any of these type of discussions. I think it's very important that these are technical constitutional law matters. And sometimes I think that there's an effort, particularly by the government and others, to gaslight and blind potentially grassroots unionists and loyalists with science on the protocol. So I think there's a real job of work to do to make sure, and I don't say this in any way in a negative or critical way, but I mean, people who are not interested in law are going to find this stuff very, very difficult to pick up, the same way as if somebody asked me to go and fix the engine in my car, I can assure you my car wouldn't run again because I wouldn't have any idea what I'm doing. So it's important that we make this stuff and the law particularly accessible to people, and where people can come and ask questions. And look, an open invitation, want to ever discuss about any of those type of issues, make contact with me, absolutely no problem. And look, the more voices within unionism, the better. But by the same token, we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. We should try and work together as collectively as unionism can, going forward. But look, I mean, many more discussions to be had, no doubt. And look, thanks for the invitation, and good luck with the rest of your show.
And just one more question, Jimmy. Can any
that's 4 more ones.
on the basis of what we've just seen here, can any unionist leadership or otherwise, can they support what's currently going on in a nutshell?
Absolutely not. And I'll go one further than you. It's not power sharing or the protocol. It is the form of the Belfast Agreement or power sharing. Fixing the protocol is not even enough. It doesn't fix the fundamental issues. The protocol is only a symptom of the infectious Belfast Agreement, and until you fix that, the symptoms will just keep on coming again and again and again. So any unionist who thinks they'll fix the protocol and go marching up the hill to Stormont, not so fast. But that's a discussion for a different day. But look, good luck for the rest of your show, John. Thanks for having me.
Jimmy Bryson, thanks very much. Thank you. So there you have it, folks. There we discussed what it was that happened in the Supreme Court. We discussed the arguments that was being made for the government against the cases that was being taken. We discussed the fact that the government were arguing in a very, very, I'm going to say, childlike fashion. And for the older folk that's on our screen, and I'm looking across the platforms here, is that, like the Monty Python dead parrot scene, is that whenever the man brought the parrot back to the shopkeeper, this parrot's dead. The government solicitor says, no, it's not. It's only sleeping. It's only resting. Excuse me. What they says was that the protocol or the Act of the Union was disapplied. Now, what I want to do here is I want to, excuse me, something in my throat. I want to play a short video, and I'll be back in a second. Hoodwinked again by the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. You have a profound sense of deja vu, is what you were writing. I want you just basically to explain what it was that drove you to write that article in the press just a few days ago. So over to you, Ben.
Okay, well, the first thing I would say, John, is this new deal, which is basically the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which is going through Parliament and is it's suggested by the government that the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill will effectively put right all the deficiencies in the protocol, remove the ECJ, bring back control of VAT and excise duties to the British government, effectively remove the customs border by creating green and red channels for goods that are destined for Northern Ireland versus the EU. That's the deal that's on the table, this Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. And what I would ask people to do is actually read it. I really implore people to read it. And if you can't read all of it, read clause 26, which is the last clause in the bill. What that clause says is that clauses 1 through to 20 have no legal effect when the bill is passed. Clauses 1 through to 20 is all the meat that Unionists and Brexiteers would wish to see in the Act. So in other words, just to make that clear and simple, the bill, if passed into law, in itself has no impact on the protocol. It doesn't change a thing. And the other thing, any legislation that the government's entitled to bring, if it should require a change of a previous act of parliament, and of course, anything meaningful would require a change in a previous act of parliament, if such change is required, that particular legislation, that particular regulation would have to go back to parliament. And they've structured it very cleverly.
So there you go. That actually helped me there whilst I went into a fit of coughing. I don't know what, something went down the wrong way or whatever. But there you go. We had Jamie Bryson there. We discussed the implications of this constitutional changing protocol. We discussed what it was that happened in the Supreme Court protocol case and the deliberations from the law lords. We hopefully will have those within the next few months. But look, right here, right now, we are in the position whereby that we have to get up off our backsides. We have to actually begin and to mount a fight back. We have to use or create an army of people with weapons of words. We have to teach people from within our own community to fight for what is rightfully ours. And we're not asking for anything that we're not due. We're not asking for anything that is unreasonable. All we are asking for is as part of the United Kingdom, from within that Act of the Union, it says that every single citizen should be on the same footing, whether that be in England, Scotland, and Wales, and in Northern Ireland. And, you know, we all should be on the same footing. But that has been disapplied, and we don't have rights here in the United Kingdom right now, and we need those rights reinstated. We need to demand that our politicians, that they don't do things that we actually don't agree with. So what I want to do is I want to finish the stream by doing something that we don't normally do. And I really wanted to talk about something just before that I play this little clip, finishing off the stream. And I will be back again, so I will tomorrow evening to do something else here at Restore UK. Now that we're back, that we're up and running again. I'm just trying to take that after that fit of coughing. Now that we're back and we're up and running again, we really do want to continue pushing the message, solidifying this single message that should be pushed out from the entire Unionist family here in Northern Ireland. We all need to stand together. We all need to demand that we remain part of the United Kingdom. We all need to demand our rights as per the Act of the Union, the Acts of the Union, and as per the Belfast so-called Good Friday Agreement. That's what we need to do. So I just want to make a small comment before that I actually move on here. So we're coming to a point in a year, it's coming up to Christmas, and we're coming up to a time in the year when a song that often plays by the farm, and that song is All Together Now. in no man's land. And this is to the people that would be on Twitter. We have quite a following of Republican trolls, otherwise known as shinnerbots. And I'm just looking across here onto Twitter, and no doubt that they all comment on the things that we do. And we can't put a message up without our friends making us popular. We're more popular within the Nationalist Republican fraternity on Twitter than we are within the Unionist community. So I guess that this is a message to them. You know, at this time of the year, and I think it was in 1914 in Belgium, well, the story would go that the soldiers that were fighting against each other, what they did was that they laid down their guns, they got up, they walked out onto no man's land, they came out of the trenches, and what they did was that they joined together and they played football. There were people at that time from within the respective camps that didn't want to see that happening. Now here we are, just over 100 years later, and we are kind of in the same sort of circumstances because, as is the words of that song, all together now in no man's land. And what I mean whenever I say that, and this is aimed at both Unionists, Protestants, Unionists, Loyalists, Nationalists, Republicans, whoever has a vested interest in making this land being Northern Ireland, actually work for the people. You know, it should be a case whereby the needs of people are met, not the wants of extremists. And we're all in the same position in where that we're all together in this no man's land, like never, ever, ever before. You know, we listened to the Nolan show this morning. We hear that there was a man that, he requested an ambulance, or his family requested an ambulance for him. And the ambulance, well, it came, I don't know what the term was, don't hold me to this exact, but was it 20 hours later? Meantime, the man had actually died, and this is what was being reported on the Nolan show this morning. And, it's not just Unionists. It's not just Protestants, Unionists, or Loyalists. We'll use that term. I don't like using those divisional terms. It's not just, Nationalists or Catholics. I mean, everyone is affected by exactly that type of thing. And again, it's because of underinvestment. It's because of, I believe that, the privatization of the health service, if they run it down, well, then they can bring private industry in to fund it. And then people will accept basically the privatization of the National Health Service. So here we are in limbo at the minute, where every single person, right around the UK, in Ireland, right around the Western world. In fact, it's happening worldwide, that we're all together now in no man's land. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little song by an Irishman. I'm going to use an Irishman to sing this. This is a little cover version. Whenever he sings this song, and I have to say, I've chosen this man specifically in an attempt to drive home to people from the Nationalist Republican side of the fence that your people, Sinn Féin, are selling you out. Your people, Sinn Féin, the Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, all of those politicians in the south, they're selling you out. The SDLP, they're selling you out. What are they bringing? Well, they're happy. They're happy to take their money whilst you suffer, whilst your family suffers, whilst you, I, and everyone else are all together now in this no man's land. Back then in 1914, it was said that ordinary people, well, they had enough, and they wanted to get up and they wanted to join together and they wanted to make a stand. And isn't it time that, I don't know whether this will happen or not, but isn't it time that people, ordinary people with a vested interest in protecting themselves, protecting their families, well, we all maybe tried to put our minds to it, to stand together in this no man's land and to say to these politicians that mean us no good, no harm, that if we allow things to go on the way that it's going on, well, they will be okay. Well, they will be treated fine, but they'll not be short in terms of their heating or their eating or anything else that goes with it. They will be handsomely rewarded for creating the circumstances, for permitting the circumstances, for turning a blind eye to the circumstances, and where you, I, and everyone else and our families, well, we ultimately suffer. So the message is this: all together now in no man's land. Our politicians are selling us out, And isn't it time that ordinary people began to realise this? And we stopped playing these silly games, and we maybe stood as one against that globalisation that means us the most harm. Playing us out with an Irishman singing all together now. Thanks very much for coming along from across the platforms. I thought that was a very, very good stream. Please leave your messages in the live chat. Give us your thoughts. Give us a like. Give us a love. Give us a share. Don't forget to share this channel out. And I will see you very, very soon, whether that be later on this evening, if I can prepare quick enough, or if not, tomorrow evening. Thanks very much for your support. Thanks very much for, over the course of the year, supporting Restore UK. People, if we don't see you before then, Merry Christmas. And thanks very much for supporting our channel. An Irishman singing a cover version of All Together Now in No Man's Land. And I hope this man doesn't mind me using him to press this message. Isn't it time that people put these petty squabbles aside? You know, we're all entitled to what it is that we believe, our belief, our culture, our way of life, our lifestyle choices. Well, shouldn't it be that should be between ourselves and our fellow enthusiasts, and it should never be permitted to interfere in anyone else's way of life? Shouldn't that be the way that things actually are? In the spirit of Christmas, have some thought. Over to this Irishman, and good evening, and thank you very much for coming along.
Remember, boy, that your forefathers died, lost in millions for a country's pride. They never mentioned the trenches of Belgium when they stopped fighting and they were won. A spirit stronger than war was at work that night. December 14, cold, clear and bright. Country's borders were right out of sight. They joined together and decided not to fight. All together now. All together now. All together now. In no man's land. Together. All together now. All together now. All together now. In no man's land. Same old story again. All those tears shed in vain. Nothing learned and nothing gained. Only hope remains. All together now. Together, all together now. All together now. In no man's land. Together, all together now. All together now. All together now. In no man's land. Boy boys had their say and they said no, stop the slaughter and let's go home. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go home. From no man's land, boys had their say and they said no, stop the fighting and let's go home. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go home. From no man's land, all together now, all together now, all together now, in no man's land.
Willing to accept any checks across the North Sea.